Grand Rising family, this is your girl, Olympus Queen. I share my loves. I hope all is well with the family today. I put it in the description box, but I'm gonna state it again. This is a series from C.G. DAHLIN. It's spirituality, esoteric occult knowledge. I'm using the Fair Use Act for copyright code 107 for educational purposes. This is where he is explaining the connection between consciousness, quantum physics, and spirituality. So I hope y'all enjoy this. I'll be, hey, good morning, Coco Love. How you doing? So I hope y'all enjoy this. This is, again, C.G. DAHLIN, Spiritual Studies on Consciousness, Physics, and Spirituality.
Welcome to Spiritual Studies Session 47. This session is
Can y'all hear it good?
on consciousness and its relation to modern day physics and in relation to age-old spirituality. What do ancient traditions and modern traditions have to say on this subject? And why is it an upcoming fascination and debate within quantum physics? There's no way to quell this topic within the time allotted. We are going to be exploring the topic, and I'll start with a personal definition.
This man here is a genius.
In my experience, what I call moments of consciousness are times of stepping outside of the situation that you're living, almost like a third-person perspective. These can be times of tremendous grief where you stand outside of yourself. These can be moments of deja vu-like recollection where you realize how you've gotten to where you are. You see yourself as the other.
I always talk about deja vu, how you always say, you might go somewhere and say to yourself, darn, seems like I've been here before. Or you might see someone, you say, seems like I know you. I've met you before. That's because it's deja vu. You met them in a past life, or you've been to a certain place in a past life. This guy here, I've actually communicated with him personally. He does a lot of lectures and stuff.
Apart, per se. Moments of consciousness can also come in groups. Sometimes to step outside of a group and to feel a tremendous sense of belonging, or to perceive the intertwining beauty of how you have all managed to come together in this space. Also, there's a lot to say of group consciousness. So that is on more of the experiential level. But this discussion is spiritual, is philosophical, epistemological, phenomenological, etymological, and of course where we'll begin is it's now a matter of physics. So when it comes to entertaining this new discussion in physics, the belief is that consciousness is a manifestation of quantum processes in the brain, that on this deep level, if only it can be observed correctly, one could find the root or the phenomena of consciousness. Otherwise, there are contingent beliefs, such as matter and consciousness are dual aspects of one fundamental reality. The search of physics began with the neurological search for the part of the brain that is responsible for consciousness, awareness. However, there was seemingly no where. So they kept going deeper and are now attempting to pin it within quantum phenomena, which at the very least will involve different revelations.
I appreciate y'all
you
for
could
tuning
say
in
that
this morning.
this fascination very much came to the forefront with the double slit experiment, of which we discussed previously in the course, to say that the act of observing was changing the phenomena of waves or particles. So what is it to say? What is the consciousness doing? What is the act of witnessing doing? How does that infiltrate, change, alter reality?
This is deep.
You can see the soupy waters of this session right now. So with this brings up questions of a philosophical variety within physics, which is free will and determinism. If there is such a thing as quantum randomness, then it would be to say that there is free will. However, if randomness is the case, then there is no goal-directed volition. There is no aim. Or is it also to say that the things within the field of quanta are all preset, but would seem random only with our lack of know-how? So you can see these are epistemological, which is a reference to what does it mean to know? What are the metaphysical bases that we are using to approach this subject? Which what we choose on that level will dictate our solution or our answers to the question of consciousness.
This man can break this thing down 100 times better than I can. I mean, I know it, but my words get I get kind of tongue-tied.
Are these phenomena of the quantum world statistic? And if so, then determined. And we see deviation on this subject, whether we're talking Schrodinger, Planck, Bohr, this conflict between determinism and free will, which is not purely a matter of physics. This is a philosophical debate that's been going on for a long time.
You're enjoying
the Greeks
this?
had a time with this one. The empiricists and the empiricists and the rationalists of the late Enlightenment and spiritual traditions. We've seen in this course, for instance, the Norse being very convinced of determinism, that everything's sent, versus, say, the Christians that would claim free will while maintaining a trope of the divine plan, seemingly contradictingly. But when it comes to physics, one of the points of fascination are these microtubuli. And this is something that
I love you, sis.
Is propounded by, oh gosh, I'm forgetting the name right now. But these particular neurofilaments and microtubuli of the neurological brain at its quantum level
lectures, just let me know. Put a one in the chat.
Correlated,
him and Melanie P. Hall
correlated
Carl
to consciousness.
And
however, in this search of nailing it down,
they deep.
This seems like yet another peg up the ladder. And then there is the quantum field theory. Now, this is interesting to me because it's to say that there are a finite amount
I
of
broadcast
options
one of
that
his
the field can perform.
I broadcast one of his lectures night before last. That the one about, let me see if I can find it here. Esoteric Christianity. He's deep, I'm telling you.
Certain times it would seem that the field does what is called spontaneous symmetry breaking. Spontaneous meaning that we can't quite understand why it does so. Now, likened to the phenomena that you feel, the vibes, maybe we could liken to disharmonious states as a breaking in the quantum symmetry, whereas all manner and flavors of harmonious states are when the quantum field is in symmetry. Now, what causes this break of symmetry is another interesting question. That the field of quanta may be a strange analogy of our own ineffable self. This field theory is not far from different spiritual traditions, which one of the leading philosophical scientific approaches to this modern quantum debacle is panpsychism. Panpsychism, which is that a theory that maintains that all things maintain an aspect of mind. All things fundamentally have an aspect of mind or thought or psyche or consciousness. Mm-hmm. This would be promoted by philosophers and spiritualists alike. Most notably, Spinoza and Leibniz are going to be the ones that are really taking this on. And these are, So what is panpsychism? Pan, meaning all, everything, whole, psyche, the soul, the mind, or another reference to psyche, the breath.
The breath of life.
So everything is living. Now, when I say this, or when modern physicists are saying this, this is animism. This is shamanism. This is the original spirituality, that everything is spirit. Now, That's if I use the word spirit, that hits the mind different based off of cultural propagation than if I were to say psyche. Psyche is more acceptable, but psyche is simply a loan word for soul. Mm-hmm. Or if I say mind, what does the mind mean? Well, if we dial it back, it's soul, spirit. It's what the ancients called soul or spirit. So my question here is this new? And the answer is no. It's not new.
Come on with it.
So let's look at the etymology of the term conscious and subsequently consciousness. So to be conscious is taking from Latin con, meaning with, and scare, which is to know, which this scare is the root of the term science. Science means to know, a loan word from the Greek syneidos. So with knowing, that's what it means to be conscious. If you are awake, you are knowing. And this is how it was originally intended. To be perceiving within oneself, to be sensibly, inwardly aware. So there's this flavor of inwardly. To witness yourself.
Mm-hmm. I tell you,
but is this witnessing of oneself? Is this fundamental question of this topic? If we are merely sensational creatures, we do off of impulse alone. But the predicament of the consciousness is that we are aware of our doing.
You like that, huh?
And that is where we can sign ourselves up for an endless refraction of mirrors. And what I mean by that is that I know that I know that I know that I know that I know.
Mm-hmm.
The point of confusion, inaction, and indecision. Notice this word, conscious, is as early as 1600. This is a newer word. Okay, so 1600, what was happening? Oh, this is the Enlightenment era. This is the beginning of the separation of the church.
Break it down.
And I know that's a shifty topic, but there was no use of this word in this way in the past because we had another word, spirit and soul, which are the same. So notice how contemporary the word conscious and consciousness is. And speaking of consciousness, the state of being aware of what passes through one's own mind.
Well.
To be privy to your thoughts. This is coming up in the 1630s. So you are, as a conscious being or as a soul-bearing being, aware of what has happened to you and are aware of what stimuli present themselves to you. And by extension, your own surroundings. Now, what's the twist on this? As soon as I say altered states of consciousness, where do our connotations go? Now, most notably with the drug wars, we are hesitant, right? We have a poor association with this word, altered states. And it's just because of that. Because altered is not a negative word. Altered is simply the root of the word alternate. Another way of being conscious.
Well.
A different consciousness. A different presentation of sensory phenomena, which is wild if you think about it. That's even possible. So how one achieves altered, what are referred to as altered states of consciousness, alternative states of consciousness. Well, this is what spirituality, animism, shamanism, paganism, all manner of spiritual traditions do differently. Whether it's prayer, whether it's dance, whether it's meditation, yoga, or sacred medicine, or what this modern era would like to call drugs.
Okay, you hear that, don't you?
If we are going to play into that game, then what we believe is correct is pharmaceutical medications in place of mental illness. And not getting to the root of where these mental illnesses come from, but treating them as symptomatic, treating the symptoms, and not getting to the root, systemic, perhaps even soul level issues, right? Perspective, right? And we only will use the medication that has been regulated, created, synthesized through a lab, although all these medications come from plants.
Thank you.
They all come from plants. And if you want to know more about this, go to the spirituality of plants topic. But, you know, aspirin,
I think I'm
bark
gonna do
of
that
the
next.
willow, right? I mean, on and on and on and on. All these things.
I think I will do that next. About the plants.
Come from
what
plants.
You think?
Plants are all the medicine in the world. It all comes from plants. And so then comes the controversial topic.
What Smokey said on Friday? He's talking about weed come from the earth. God put this here for me and you.
Of hallucinogens, psychedelics. That, and now only very recently, has the lid started to boil over on this topic of treating otherwise untreatable conditions by use of plant medicine. Whether it's Cabo or different brews of tea, say ayahuasca or psilocybin, that these, through research, have been found to treat, let's do a list, eating disorders, addictions, trauma, depressions. They have shown through study to increase neurological function, and a notable furthering attribute of openness within those who have been studied, an improvement of their mental health.
Ain't that something?
So altered consciousness, altered states of consciousness, maybe throughout history, spiritual traditions have been onto something about the healthiness, the need to achieve what we call altered states of consciousness, that one needs to perceive differently, see differently, that perhaps one lens of looking at the world is toxic and neurotic. Okay, I'm getting heated already. So let's jump out of that for a bit and start looking at this a bit differently. And I want to look at Sufism or Sufism. And this is something I haven't got to mention much in the course. But there's this term that I'm not going to be saying frequently because we all know how good I am at pronunciations. But it's W-A-J-D or it's W-U-J-U-D. Wajd. That's the one time I'll try to say it. The etymological root meaning of this word is being, existence, and finding. So I'm going to use the word being as the substitute in English. So there are different types of being within this tradition. The being of prophets is one of them. The realization of highest consciousness, being on the third person perspective, a omnipresent perspective, a getting out of oneself, a being of prophets is the coined term. The being of saints, which is a state of calm, of bliss, of being at peace, likened to a meditative enlightenment. There's a being of dervishes.
How you doing?
This is the rhythmic motion of the body. Okay, where do we find this? In the dance. In the dance of the ancient shamanic and paganistic.
Do you find this topic interesting information, man? You know, your opinion means a lot to me because you're the man.
Traditions to achieve an altered state of being. There's the being of idealists. And this is the dramatic, the grief or the euphoric sense of bodily threshold. This could be supreme happiness or supreme sadness, tears, joy. Then the being of devotees. And this, yet again, is a similar but not quite the same exalted state of the physical and mental.
Have a wonderful day, love. Information. Don't work too hard now.
Body, the absolute heightened summit of physical sensation and stimuli. These are all different beings that are within the spiritual tradition. Now, do we understand this being, this wajd, this existence and finding as a synonym for consciousness? Perhaps. Perhaps, too, it's a synonym for perception. Perhaps, too, it's a synonym for awareness. And perhaps all these things are different sides of the die. Perhaps we can call it attainment, an attainment of a specific, significant, inward sensation, phenomena, perspective. How do we propagate this is an interesting question. How does this come to be? Because the concrete world, in unpredictable ways, at time can knock you out of yourself. Again, like I said in the beginning, maybe through grief, maybe through bliss, maybe through being around other people. these strange moments of deja vu, or you being snapped into yourself, suddenly very aware. But in these different ways of being, these are different ways of propagating these feelings. Rhythmic motion, meditation, yoga. I mean, these are not the way, but they're a way. You know, they are different means of achieving a certain state of consciousness, or teasing out the consciousness, or the soul, or the spirit. Oh. Now, when it's mentioned of what God is, and this is a fascinating subject here, it is that he is known and the object of awareness.
Ain't that something?
And that he is immutable and self-realized. So, this is really me stepping out on a leg here, but it's just a maybe, just an idea. But maybe to certain people throughout history, or to certain traditions, God is consciousness. That when you are one with God, or when you are in communion with God, that these are moments of realizing third-person perspective yourself, a higher vantage point view of what otherwise would have been an autonomic, an autonomous, self-pilot, without realization. Autopilot is what I was looking for. That maybe, whether it's different pagan traditions imbibing a god, embodying, or whether it's the Christians in having a revelatory communion with God, that these are moments of succinct consciousness. And likewise, nirvana, enlightenment, divinity, all these things. What if it's all about these sharp moments of poignant consciousness? Knowing, lack of a better term. So these different ways within Sufism, or Sufism, I'm not even sure if I'm saying that right. These different states of being, what are other ways? Okay, receiving bad news could be a way to knock you into this state of being, this wagged. A longing for someone else, an absence of something, that something's gone, perhaps a death. What does death do to you? It might make you reflect on what life is all about and what's important. This would be a moment of stepping into yourself. Another way of being is by witnessing the heart, witnessing hurt or joy or love. Witnessing could be a moment of stepping outside of your autopilot, stepping outside of unconscious drives of pure instinct. Another way of being or attaining this being is overwhelming, to become overwhelmed by something, whether it's weeping or whether it's beauty. To be overwhelmed is another means of achieving being. Now that you might find yourself at a complete loss, in a state of ruin, and this is where you find a state of being. And so it's interesting here because, yet again, all these alternative terminologies, witnessing, perception, what's the difference between being or finding and witnessing? It seems like such a semantic jumble. How can we distinguish the difference between just simply witnessing and finding? Now, there was a saying that if one can say the word dates without tasting the sweetness in their mouth, then they weren't really witnessing dates, or weren't really saying dates. that there's a savoring that
I don't
comes
know what I
along
don't
with
did
all
here.
states of being, that if you were truly there, it would involve the sensation. You know, if you are talking about a loss that you've experienced in life, you ought to still feel that loss. And this could be a difference in witnessing and finding. That simply witnessing might not include the living part of it, but finding would seem to be an involvement with whatever sensation or is being recollected or experienced. So to hop out of that for a little bit, you know, it's an interesting philosophical and spiritual and linguistic wormhole. But I want to look at a little bit of this rhythmic motion state of beingness, right? I've mentioned, I mean, it speaks to these different states of being within Sufism.
I can't see the comments
that is
now.
The being of dervishes and the being of devotees, the state of exalted mental and physical faculties, of the state of motion achieving this, of rhythmic motion, of dance, of enthralling your body and psyche. And I want to point to what I talked about last week in the course, which is the Dionysian mysteries that would lead to Orphism. And what did they do in the Dionysian mysteries? They used intoxicants and ecstatic dance and music to achieve higher states of being. And see, here I'm using higher states of being instead of altered states of being, right? And again, point to, go witness a tribe across the world, and these dancing ceremonies, these songs, these drums, this rhythmic motion is the being of dervishes and devotees, is a means and faculty of consciousness seen throughout different spiritual traditions. And likewise, to approach it differently, forms of meditation, whether it's transcendental or you know, of a different tradition, you know, call it, oh God, there's so many different names. But, you know, to take the time to rest within yourself, to repeat a mantra, to simply just calm, or to do a mental visualization, to go within your imagination, or again, hearkening to the shamanic tradition, is to take the shamanic journey, to go within yourself and commune with your spirit. And
don't I always tell y'all, you got to go within, center within. What I always tell you, center with God and He'll center in you.
Or the ancestors. These are all different moments of you taking the time to achieve a different state of consciousness, of being. You're in the same place, but you're not in the same place.
Mm-hmm.
This is real trippy territory. And to step out of anxiety, to step out of this ADHD neuroticism, would be to intentionally use and facilitate consciousness.
Mm.
Now, in this subject, there are a lot of wooey leads, you know, for all these new age traditions that are like, raise the consciousness, you know, raise the vibration, achieve Christ consciousness, you know. So let's talk about at least that a little bit. As far as I can tell, this aspect of Christ consciousness is really either coined or very much proliferated by Edgar Cayce. And it's this way of this apparent birthright of returning to God, as it's put. That we are not simply flesh and blood, that we are spiritual beings inhabiting a vessel, which is a part of many different spiritual traditions. And that this is all a means to return to what was lost in the garden, which is this state of absolute consciousness. This is the way that the story is presented. At the end of times, or the revelation, is not to escape the earth, but it is to bring spirit, or i.e. consciousness, to the planet and transmute the whole situation by dissolving fear and misunderstanding, by full frontal, full on, everyone, everything spirit. This approach, this mindfulness, this state of being is Christ consciousness, that a person can attain this state of being, which again was one of the ways of being within Sufism. It was the way, the being of prophets, the realization of the highest consciousness. God and mankind, that mankind was created in the image of the Creator, right? So you point to Luke 15:11 through 24, right? We were with God in the beginning, and through the power of our free will, we were able to make the choice that to be in a perfect accordance with the Creator. We will return to this. Or look at John 17:16, that Jesus says, "They are not of the world, even as I am not of the world." So what is meant by that? That this is the achieving of the exterior perspective, of the knocking of the conscious state, of the higher vantage point, as if you are looking at it third person, omnipresent, bringing a state of unity, omniscience, and bliss, of understanding, of knowing, of gnosis, of becoming a Kabbalist, of reaching nirvana, of achieving moksha. I mean, what language would you like me to use? Now, to kind of point the finger more at Christianity's relationship with this topic, I want to bring up something that doesn't get brought up enough, and that is Montanism. Montanus was a monk around 150 to 170, and was said to have a gift of speaking in tongues, or in another verbiage, glossolalia. That this gift, or this state of being, was thought to have been being one with the Holy Spirit, to claim that he was the Father and the Son and the Paraclete, which is a very old reference, but I'm not going to get into that right now. And that this movement was all around, again, early Christian movement that I haven't got to mention, was all around these ecstatic experiences, that these revelations could come involuntarily or voluntarily into a person that would achieve a state of Christ consciousness, whatever you want to call it. And just as a side note, this is a movement within early Christianity that was very much aligned with discussion that we had previously about, the history of women in early Christianity. This movement held up two women very strongly, Maximilia and Priscilla, or Prisca, depending. And, anyway, that's a side note. However, what would happen to the Montanists? Well, if you know what Christianity's done with many of its alternatives, I don't need to say it, but it's just something I wanted to point out, that this is a state of ecstatic wonderment. This is a state of frenzy, of blabbling, of utterly losing, not losing, but an alternate state of being. That, how does that come about? I mean, modernly speaking, they would claim that this is a form of psychosis, but clearly we are not in a good standing based off everything I'm saying today, to understand the nuances and the ineffableness of the question of consciousness. Now, also to continue pointing the finger at Christianity, Giordano Bruno, of which I've got to mention once in the course before. Here's a quote made in 1584. The universe is of infinite size, and the worlds therein without number. The worlds contained therein, such as earths, fires, and other species of body named stars, are infinite in number, and all move by the internal principle which is their own soul. It is vain to persist in seeking an extrinsic cause of their motion. Okay.
Here you go.
This is a priest in the 1500s that is preaching panpsychism, as we mentioned in the beginning, and is throwing out, completely decimating the geocentric model. A Christian priest. That Bruno was deeply religious, believed heavily in God and magic, and is making what would otherwise seem to be a scientific statement. Just like Spinoza, just like Leibniz, we have Bruno here saying that God is within every part of the universe, or spirit, or consciousness is within every part.
Y'all, there's some good information now. Y'all need to be listening.
The universe, that divinity is within us and in every other heavenly body. That God is the nature of all natures. Now, to go to various cosmogonies, the creator sits there at the beginning, whether we're talking paganism, what have you. And what is the creator doing? The creator's first thing is always that the creator is aware of the situation. That's the first thing. The second thing is the word. The word is the reverberation or the creation or the Big Bang, if we care to use that term. So what is the first thing then? The first thing is awareness. Awareness. And that this is the nature of all natures. The knowing. To take another quote from Bruno, God is the universal world soul.
That's right.
And that all particular material things are manifestations of one infinite principle.
That's right.
That God is the infinite infinity, the infinite in infinity, the everywhere and everything, neither above nor below, but absolutely present. Now,
that's why
when I spoke of Leibniz,
that's why I say, as above, so below, as within, so without.
Spinoza. A while back, I made the argument for Spinoza that he was to say that everything is a radical subjectivity. That if nobody is looking at the house doesn't exist. That you being conscious of something creates the thing or perpetuates the existence of the thing. Now, if we choose to look at things poorly, and they will appear poorly. If we choose to look at things as if such poor things don't exist, there is nothing to perpetuate it. I use the example that if we woke up tomorrow and said that money didn't exist, it wouldn't. If we all just woke up tomorrow and agreed that it wasn't a thing, it wouldn't be a thing. Everything is held up by the feeding of consciousness into the idea. Now, how did he explain that the house was still there even if nobody was looking? Well, he said it's because of God. And it seems like a throwaway term. But here, let's just substitute the word consciousness. That if consciousness is within all things, that it is radical subjectivity, yet it would seem like the world is an objective place. So, anyhow. Bruno was immediately disenfranchised as soon as he was ordained as a priest because of his irregular and outspoken views. And that, as the story goes, through many times of running away, he is eventually burned at the stake. He is killed by the church for what he's saying. Now, what does that say? Too, there's a point to look at here. The risk of consciousness, the risk of realizing what's going on, the risk of sticking your neck out there, of saying otherwise. And what does that say about the state of humanity? Now, this might seem like a very dark topic to bring up, and there's a lot of cynicism, worthy cynicism, within this outlook. But here is the case, right? Where, and look at Jesus in the same extension. Not to make too heavy of a tie between Bruno and Jesus, but I'm just saying, if you're going to use this canon, use this vernacular, Jesus was speaking out the truth, speaking out what was experienced within him, if you take him to be a literal person of the world. And what happens to him? People don't like that. People don't like that at all. And then dial the clock forward 1,500 years. Here we have Bruno, has a realization, speaks out things. What happens to him? They kill him at the stake.
I'm bringing you the
you
truth.
could go through a laundry list of examples here. So consciousness, oh gosh, I'm just going to move on. Here's some quotes from Schrödinger. Consciousness cannot be accounted for in physical terms. Take a note here, physicists. Here's a physicist saying this. For consciousness is absolutely fundamental. It cannot be accounted for in terms of anything else. Scathing stuff. Scathing. There's another one, Aldous Huxley. Consciousness is only possible through change. Change is the only possible movement. Now, a long time ago, I did a talk on divination and palmistry. And one of the key
Steve, what's
one
up,
of the key factors of learning palmistry is that you know that the will is what changes the character of the person. So on the non-dominant hand is the grid of what somebody would be if they never changed anything about themselves. And on the dominant hand, the difference between the two shows what the person has consciously changed about their life, changed about their habits, changed about their approach, changed about their perspective. So, consciousness is tied to change. That when things change, this is tied to achieving the state of being. So, facilitating altered states of consciousness through prayer, meditation, what have you, is a way of presenting change and is a way of facilitating consciousness. That the nature of all nature abhors stasis, abhors staticness, that it wants to DJ remix infinite. Another quote, Terence McKenna. You are an explorer and you represent our species. And the greatest good you can do is to bring back a new idea, because our world is endangered by the absence of good ideas. Our world is in crisis because of the absence of consciousness. A point that I've brought up several times throughout the course. Ask the shamans what's wrong with the world, where we went wrong as a species, why this ecological devastation, why the pitfalls and nihilism of postmodernism.
Oh, information man, my guy.
And they will say,
hey, he the one really inspired me to start my channel.
Divorce yourself from spirit. Here we have McKenna saying, the world is in crisis because of an absence of consciousness, that we need to see what we're doing, even if that's really ugly. And that the world needs to know, we, you, I, need to know what's going on.
I didn't know you knew information.
And it's not that we are incapable, it's that we don't want to. That is why these people have been killed. We don't want to know. We wish to continue in what the Hindus call Maya. We wish to continue in illusion. So for those that are spiritual seekers, for those that are fascinated in the questions of consciousness in physics or whatever discipline, philosophy, in questions of empiricism versus rationalism, free will, determinism, all these things that are tied to, it's all to say that to be a good person, and I use that term very loosely because good is a very nebulous term, but that we need to be aware of ourselves, aware of the implications. And it's not to bat your head against how powerless you are, but it's to say that we need to embrace awareness, consciousness, spirit, soul.
That's right.
Embrace these different ways of facilitating it. Dance, meditation, reflection. I mean, whatever, they're all different ways to reach that state of being. But this is where it needs to go. This is where we became lost. This is a topic that has been batting us on the head through various religions of the past, through modern dilemmas of fundamental, the carpet ripping out under the floorboards of science and physics. This is a thing that will and needs
this lecture
to be faced in some capacity. Now, I don't want to seem as though I'm on a soapbox preaching here, but it's just to say that in a lens of looking at all the spiritual traditions that we've been looking at, or a lens to look at the state of the world, or a lens to look at the progress per se of science, or anything for that matter, we can always use this measuring stick, can always become better attuned to who is really there. How many people around you are present, are capable of being there with you in person, in conscious, instead of being pure self-seeking instinctiveness. I mean, this is deep stuff. But before I ramble on too much, I'm going to close it at that.
The spirituality of the world.
Welcome to Spiritual Studies Session 56. This is a broader subject, focusing on the word. In regards to spiritual traditions, one might immediately think of the word. In the beginning, there was the word,
and the word was
or the word of God.
Mm-hmm.
However, this goes back into the shamanic traditions, and this has plenty of boundary dissolving realizations along the way. Note from the beginning the paradox of me talking about the word via words. The living word is a spiritual tradition that has not been put into a book. We saw this with the Aboriginals. We see this with the oral myths of ancient past, of native traditions.
That's right.
The act of putting the word to book is a codification. It makes it concrete and is no longer living. It doesn't have this air, this flexibility. So when you or I are pushing into a ancient spiritual tradition, we are looking for sources, books, articles, what have you. And these are codifications. These are not the living words.
That's right.
So yes, it is a critique on what I can do in the course. But let's take this further. Incantation, enchantment, and fascinate all are rooted in word. What do I mean? Incantation, cantation is speaking, and enchantment is chanting. It's speaking. Fascinate is faskin in Greek, speaking. When we spell, like in a magical tradition, there's a spell. It's spoken. When we spell a word, we're spelling. It's a spell. Speaking.
That's right.
Reading, writing. This is all a sort of magic.
Don't I tell y'all all the time? The words of spells.
You can't have this, look at whatever ceremony, any ceremony, and there is either a reciting by word of the book, or there is a singing. And this act of mutual singing is a sort of magic. It changes the environment.
I can't make it up.
It changes the spirits. And before I get down that alleyway, I want to mention, too, the meter of words in poetic traditions. Iambic pentameter, anapastroches, what have you. This is all to say that every word in every sentence in any language ever, ever, ever is a dance of stressed and unstressed syllables. So when I'm speaking to you, it is a dipping up and down of enunciation, of intonation. This is a yin and yang dance. This up and down vibration is this magic, the word. And I don't even have to be speaking of a certain meaning. As long as I make it sound nice, airy enough, or it unlocks a certain emotional complex, then the work is done. It didn't even need meaning. It just needed sound, which is a bit of a nod to like political speeches, right? What's really being said? Well, a whole lot of nothing, but it's a lot of sound, and it's definitely playing the part. Oh man, I don't want to get down that alley. The etymology of spirit, as has been discussed in the course before, is air, respiration, breathing, spiration, spirit. Spirit is air. What is air doing?
This
air
shit
is being
deep, boy. This shit deep
right now. So that's spirit. I am emitting spirit, literally. And so let's look at the heaviness of this Bible. John 1:1-3. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. All things were made by him, and without him was not anything made that was made. So let's jump out of the average approach. What was there before there was anything spoken? Like literally,
I hope all is well.
Just think anthropologically. Just think historically. What was before we uttered a word? Well, there's clearly no story before that point. It was all music.
That's right.
It was all raw, ineffable sensation. And we likely had a fascination.
Music is the highest vibration. Love is the highest. Music is the high vibration, but love is the highest vibration.
With sound, we were so fascinated with the articulation of sound and enjoyed it so much that we managed to evolutionarily forge the intricacy of our voice box, of our larynx and such, to the point now where I'm making sounds like this. And from the sound, like a tree producing fruit, budded the first meaning, the first word, to say that that sound means that thing, which is absurd because the sound it isn't the thing. It represents the thing. But this is the part. As soon as these sounds, blah, 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 mean something, that we say it means something, that's when we start to need a story. That's when we can start to ask questions. Once we start going down the road of meaning. So when we start to ask questions, then we start to need traditions, stories. So what was there before the word? Well, there was no need for story. Everything that happened before that point was of itself fulfilled. Unspoken truth. And everything after is a story. So 3,000 years ago, what was the story that people were telling each other? Okay, we've talked about that some, you know? Oh, look over here. What's
the greatest story ever told was just that, a damn story.
Story that we're telling ourselves. Oh, that's a nice story. That's a nice story.
Hey, Shay Love.
You know, just shortly after what we call year zero, what was the story then?
All is well.
All right, dial it forward 1,000 years. Okay, what's the story now? Oh, that's a story. That is a story. That's a story. And what are we doing now? What's up with this now? Oh, that's a story. I think it had something to do with the big explosion. What a story. You see? I hope you see. So I don't want to rant too much more on that.
This man is a
Genesis
genius.
1:2. And the earth was without form and void, and darkness was on the face of the deep. And the Spirit of God moved on the face of the waters. We're going to touch on that one later. But of course, before anything was spoken,
I hope y'all enjoying this.
It was without form. Because there's no distinguishing between you, I, me, we.
Any day that God wake me up, put that breath in my body, and I'm going to take it back to how they used to pray in the church. Woke me up this morning in my right mind, still with the capabilities of my limbs. Oh, high glory.
There's nothing to distinguish. So thus formless. There's nothing to distinguish what I would call a tree or what I would call nature. Nothing is distinguished. It's all there. And thus it's sort of void because there is no otherness. Okay. The story of Odin in Norse mythology, acquiring the mead of poetry. And we've covered this story, transforming several times over. I think he was like enchanting a lady and manages to acquire this mead of poetry and hold it in his mouth. And as he's bringing it back to secure it, some of it drips onto Midgard, which is the source of bad poets and bad scholars, because they have the lesser or a small meager amount of the meat of poetry. However, Odin does gift the meat of poetry.
What do you think it is about this formatting that seems to work so well to bring people from just hearing something to actually doing it?
So, the other thing about me, Mel Robbins, is that I think talk is really cheap.
However, Odin does gift the meat of poetry to his chosen mortals. And this, in the Greek tradition, is what you would call the Muses.
That's a little remix. How about
or
that?
In the Christian canon, the Holy Ghost. And this is all about channeling. So, when you write a story, or when you come up with a story, how? Where's that coming from? And you can kind of throw this off to the side and say, well, it's the imagination, it's the subconscious. Doesn't answer anything. Where does it come from? These great novels, these great stories of our history, these inspired actions of painters, of artists, of anything that gives life some zest throughout the human history, is through this channeling, which by virtue of so an example, we saw with in the Hermetic tradition, several writers would write their name as Hermes Trismegistus because they did not want to take credit for what they were writing because they viewed it as coming from the source of wisdom, Hermes, that they were vessels of.
And Hermes is the emerald tablets of Thoth.
The word. So why would they put their name on it? They're just a conduit along the line. They're just an assembly belt. So what do they say about the Bible? Well, they say it came through the word of God, channeled through human beings who listened most astutely. Okay. Doesn't sound too different to me. And so these cases of what is the artist, what is the creator per se, and that's kind of a misnomer, but the creator, where is it coming from? What is the source of this communication? And that gets into very boundary dissolving territory, which the first session of this whole course was about the spiritualist tradition. And a lot of that is steeped in trying to investigate this aspect of channeling, which we seem rather dismissive of in the modern day. And even in artistic communities, this isn't a common topic. I mean, we're supposed to put our name on our creation to satiate the kind of modern ego convention, right? But in the ancient past, there was the gift of tongues. There was glossolalia.
Break it down.
And this had a big part in religious traditions, in the oracles of Delphi, in the early Christian mysticism, this belief of direct contact with the divine, whether they were gods or God. Didn't matter what word you're putting to them. It's coming from something else, something seemingly higher than you. And whether it's not, in another case, it was, again, the muses, the muse. And again, muse etymology is music, sound. That it's all coming from the muse, music, the sound, which is what words are and your creation and the oracles and whatever. So I tell you something significant. I tell you something about the future. It's a sound. It comes true. We put meaning to it. Ugh. Hop over. The Well of Erd. Also in the, Germanic traditions, but most notably the Norse tradition. The well, most often put as the well underneath Yggdrasil, the world tree. And that this was the source that feeds the main tree. And so I say the Well of Erd, Okay, old nurse, herb, or what in English, Old English is weird. Isn't that weird? And in Old Saxon, word. And in Old High Germanic, wort. So pay attention to that one, because that one's going to come up right now. The Old High German wort is the root of the etymology of the word word. Okay, let me unpack that for you. We can call it the well of Erd, but we could also say it's the well of all words. That is a translation through these different branches of linguistics. And it also is weird. And this is a weird conversation. And that is also etymologically true to this. You could also call it the well of weird. So what is this? What is this well? It is where the Morai are. And I use Morai as the Greek nod to this, because the Morai would give the oracles glossolalia. They would give them the words. But in this case, it's the Fates, the Norns, the three Norns that guard or live alongside the well of Erd, described as a lake. And this is where they set down the laws, where they choose lives, where they give the fates to everybody. So anything that will ever happen is spoken by the Norns at the well of Erd. And they, just like in the Greek tradition, just like with the Morai, just like with the daughters of Ananke, they have power over the gods. They are the supreme force. And with the Norns, they're Erd, Vendati,
y'all please like, share, and subscribe.
These Norns are, again, translated as past, present, and future. So what is the most fundamental nature to the linguistic set that we have, the lexicon, right? What is our linchpin to make it possible? It is past tense, present, future, to a certain extent. That's very oversimplified, but it's to say this did happen, this is happening, this or it will happen. This gives logistics to be able to coordinate, communicate what we are experiencing in the raw sensation phenomena of what we call reality. So the fates at the very peak of this whole thing, or very base of this whole thing, is the past, present, and future, and is the word. And this whole topic is very obscure, very, very obscure. But there is a translation of an old piece in the Nordic tradition, and I'm going to quote it here. It says, "Time 'tis to discourse from the preacher's chair. By the well of Erd I sat silent. I saw and meditated, and I listened to men's words." So in this place of fate, it's all just words. It's all just words. And with this case of the well being a lake, this is a nod back to the shamanic traditions. Shamanic magic included, in certain traditions, looking into the water. The reflection was a source of divination or occult wisdom, that things could be divined from the reflection in the water, in a mirror, what have you. And so when it is said in Genesis, "And the earth was without form and void, and darkness was on the face of the deep, and the Spirit of God moved on the face of the waters," looking in, right? Looking into the waters. This is a strange reference. This is a tie to the well of Erd, to this very obscure conversation of fates. And this isn't the only tradition we can tie it to. I'm just trying to stay somewhat online here since I'm, babbling about. Jesus says in Matthew 4:4, "It is written, man shall not live on bread alone, but on every word that comes from the mouth of God." So, in this way, all of reality Everything that's happening is the word of God. Okay. Well, let's bring this back. Let's tie it back, right? Everything that has ever happened, ever in the Hindu tradition is from the breath of Brahman. At the beginning, you know, this whole thing started when the Brahman exhaled. So the Big Bang, as we say it now, this expansion was the exhale of the Brahman, and that by this tradition, it will at some point contract the universe back in, and this is the inhale of the breath of Brahman. But everything that's happening, everything that you've ever experienced, everything that you've ever done, everything that you ever could conceive is within one breath.
Mm-hmm.
And so in this other tradition here, we're saying every word that comes from the mouth of God, everything, right? Everything that's feeding you, that even the food and all this stuff, right, is a consequence of the word. So, man. John 1:14, the word became flesh and made his dwelling among us. The word became flesh, actualization, manifestation of the word. To speak it and it becomes. So I've used this example before. I get an idea. I don't know why, but hey, I want to shed. Okay, so I have the thought. First comes the thought. Oh, I know. I use this in Kabbalism. First comes the thought, and then I speak it. Hey, buddy, do you mind helping me build this? Hey, okay. Well, what do we need? We put all these things together, right? And then we start building. We start procuring the necessities of this operation. We put in the work and the labor, and this is all done by the flesh. But the first thing that animated the flesh was the word, was the thought and the enunciation of what will be. And so in that way, I pulled off manifestation right then. I actualized something from the word. I made it flesh. And so the seriousness of what we can do with our words is the discussion here too.
That's right.
Because you see in Proverbs 18:21, the tongue has the power of life and death.
I say it
and
all
those
the time.
who love it will eat its fruits. Well, to throw that one back on the church, I brought him up before, Giordano Bruno, right? What he said brought his death. You know, it's not anything that he did. It's not something that he physically did. It's just that he was saying things that the church didn't like. And so that brought him death because he was saying things. And isn't that just the most absurd? I hope this gets across because I've often thought this. What you say can have people kill you.
That's right.
They will kill you because of what you say.
That's right.
And whether this is like disclosing information or in the ancient past, it was like speaking, well, not so ancient actually, but speaking ill of, it's still happening. Speaking ill of rulers, speaking ill of the times that you were in, like, you know, that would get you at the very least sent away from your home. That's the first thing, maybe, but they could just kill you, and they often would. They would take you out of this existence, presumably, because of what you say.
Mm-hmm.
And that is, I can't grasp how strange that is, because it's just noise. But people don't like what you do with the noise. Get at me in the comments about something I say. Come after me because of these noises. What's going on? What's going on there? So this is a, you know, in a lighter way in Galatians. The fruit of the Spirit is love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, and self-control. So this is what is being said ought to be done with the Spirit. And by Spirit, let's directly translate that to the Word. So these are the things that should be done with words. That it should manifest, it should embody, it should provide, it should perpetuate love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, and self-control. And that's all nice. That's all real nice. Provided that people do it, provided that people live in it. provided that they perpetuate it. So let's jump over to Japan in the Shinto tradition. And I'm going to mispronounce this, but what I'm seeing in front of me is Kotodama. So Kotodama, coming from two different words, koto meaning speech or word, and tama meaning spirit and soul. So in our translation discussion thus far, this is the word word. This is the spirit spirit. This is the soul. Kotodama, roughly translated also as word. So this is Shintoism, right? Shintoism is that like not if not on par with the shaman, with its in that area, so forth. And this fundamental, the word has a spiritual power to it. So when you speak positive, the magic of it will bring positive, and when you speak negative, it will bring negative. Dial it back in our shamanic discussions. If you were out in the woods, you would not speak the name of the bear, right? Because that would be to manifest the bear. The word is understood as the manifestation. So, and I've witnessed this, and whether I'm insane, whatever, but I live in the Pacific Northwest, and we have rattlesnakes up here. And the only times that I have come into contact when I'm hiking with people with rattlesnakes is when I'm with somebody who insists upon naming it, right? Upon saying there are snakes out here, or I hope we don't bump into a snake. And there's been no time whatsoever that I have happened across one if it hasn't been spoken, or if it's not like a ringing thought at the very least. And so this is an ancient shamanic trope, is that you watch what you say, and not necessarily because it will get you in trouble with people, but the universe has ears. It is receptive to it. And so it'll come out. Oh, you called me? And mind you too, the word summoning, like when people say summon a spirit, if I say, hey, you over there, I'm summoning you. And that is a magical act. I have procured your attention by summoning you with the word. Or, if I call you on the phone, I'm summoning you. That is a magical act of ancient proportions. So if I want to summon a spirit, then let's say I want to feel nice, right? So then I can sing nice things. And by the act of singing nice things, I will feel better. It might take some time because I got to hash out that muckiness inside me. But that is a summoning of spirit right there. I mean, this power does not live in the words by itself. It also lives in the very thoughts and where the thought came from, of course. But in the intonation of words, this is also a sort of like procuring of this power. You can say something very nice, but if you intonate it a specific way, it is terribly negative. And like you can take the biggest of big boy, the most masculine of chads, and say, if the very specific thing that they are insecure about, something that digs at their childhood or whatever, if you say that thing, you're gonna break all that muscle in no time. It's gonna rack the mind. And that's the power of the word, in sending this like ship of negative energy to that person that will infect them, because it's perfectly crafted to like wiggle itself through all of these layers of protection and infect somebody's inner sanctum, their inner self. And in the same way, you could concoct these perfect words to get right through to somebody and restore them and make them feel great and to honor them, to respect them. And that is the love and that is the power of the word. So in this way, it's not just the nature of like that words alone have spirit, because people have spirit and animals have spirit and things have this ineffable essence of themselves, the rocks, the trees, whatever, even if they don't make use of the word, because there is other magic per se at work here. beyond just the act of speaking in the way that we recognize it. And there's something else heavy to consider here too, that you are always receptive to your own words. And what I mean by that is you're always the first listener, and that's the way it's put. So what you actualize, what you speak on, will have a kind of cyclical effect on your inner being, on your emotional landscape, on how you're feeling, and on how you respect yourself or whatever. So if you might notice that somebody who likes to complain will never run out of things to complain about, because it's that receptiveness. They hear it, they speak it, they hear it, they speak it, they speak, you know, they hear it in cyclical. And if you want things to be bad, there's no shortage of things to find. And if you want things to be good, there's no shortage of things to find. If you sincerely are looking for beauty in the world, it will be found, and it will be abundant. And then you can speak on it, and that's reciprocal. And the nature of things is receptive to that, as if you are being spoken to. So what does this say about the nature of prayer, right? And this is a subject, right? Because what is considered prayer is often in the association of how it's done in the Christian tradition. But if you go to a sweat lodge, then you also see that the natives will, use this term as well in its translation in English, because the act of prayer is this act of manifestation of the word, where you are speaking what things you want to occur. Now, what things you hope for, and that gives it a chance. Now, this can be viewed as superfluous in the context as it's been painted in the kind of exoteric Christianity. However, if it's understood in this older fashion that I'm trying to speak to, where you understand the reciprocal quality of your inner life and what you experience and what you speak out into the world, then prayer doesn't seem so inane. And would it really be hurtful to wish the best and the practice of wishing the best? It's just when it gets conflated with these weird theologies that it gets messy. So, don't necessarily knock prayer depending on how it only depends on the person utilizing the prayer, I suppose, and what sort of intentionality that they're putting into it. Because wishing ill on other people is clearly not a matured, a learned stance to take. That's not the way at all. I suppose the idealistic approach, as is touted by Scripture, it would seem, whether it's practiced or not, would be this love, this universal compassion. So in that way, if somebody does ill to you, the idea is to pray, speak compassion. Because here's another thing. I used this example before too. If a man says he's a dog, acts like a dog, crawls around like a dog, then given days of practice, people will also start to treat them like a dog. They'll get over the weirdness of it, and they'll just roll with it. So if I have an impression too, this is a kind of confirmation bias, and there is a word for this in the psychological tradition, where if I believe that this person is just not a good person, and I immediately brand them as such, then I will assist, or I will perpetuate, or I will force them to become that by what I say to them and by how I treat them. And so then those words are very powerful, because it will eventually become of somebody. Oh, you want me to be that? Okay, I'll show you that, right? After you've like grinded them down enough. And the same with you, that you have been taken over by people's words, that you have become what they speak of you. And so in this way, you know, our names, our categories in society, we are these fluid things. We are these ineffable, unnameable things that have a seeming tremendous potentiation of all the things that could be. We could be any of those things. But we are crafted by these categories, by what people expect of us, by what they want to make of us, and we become it. So when, in dialing it back to the Word of God or the Norns or the Fates, it's to say this idea that there is this objective function out there somewhere that speaks the innate qualities of the universe, that speaks to the fundamental things of metaphysics that we will experience. And while we might have some free reign within it, these ultimate foundations are spoken by this objective aspect, by the Norns at the Well of Erd, by the Word of God, by, you know, the Heka of Egyptian polytheism. So, in summation, man, this is such a tricky subject. That is a summation, but that's not what I'm trying to go for.
Eat me some oatmeal this morning.
There is a music to what we do and what I'm doing right now. And what music we choose to play is within our choice to an extent. But it is very powerful, very powerful. And this fundamental thing brought up at the beginning of us needing a story is just uncertainty. It's our uncomfortableness with the unknown. We come up with these stories to say, this is how the universe began, to say, this is why I'm in the world, say, this is why I'm a good person. These are stories, words. It's just music. And the genre changes throughout time. And so it's not that I'm selling nihilism here. It's quite contrary to that. Because the nihilism would seem to imply a lack of control, a fundamental chaos to the whole orchestration. But through Hermetic understanding, the principle of vibration or duality or manifestation, what you hear, what you let into your head, what company you hold has an effect on who you are.
That's right.
And what you choose to speak on has an effect on who you are.
Birds
and also has an
together.
effect on everything that happens around you. If I speak ill of nature and I say that it's just for my use, then I have no problem going out there and taking what I want, not respecting it. That's not love and compassion. But if I say that there is a fundamental beauty, right? If I reverent to its happening, then it is beautiful and it is sacred because of the word, as a kind of codifier of this ephemeral everythingness. So I would just continue to spin my wheels here. I think I've been thorough enough. This is not a subject that can be talked enough about because the implications are literally implicated of everything. So
welcome to Spiritual Studies Session 50. In reflecting on how I wanted to...
Much love and respect to everyone that came into the chat today. I say my loves. I hope y'all enjoyed it. This your girl, Miss Queen. If you like this content, excuse me, please like, share, subscribe, and drop me a comment down in the box below. I say my loves.